Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to this ORCID 101 ORCID ID and ORCID record call. I'm going to go over our agenda today. So we'll talk about what is ORCID. We'll introduce you to the ORCID ID and the ORCID record. Then we'll briefly talk about the benefits of ORCID for individuals. And then we'll go into how you can populate your ORCID record from your affiliations to your works and the best ways to get the most use out of your ORCID record, followed by some additional tips and tricks. And then at the end, we will have time for that questions and discussions Q&A. So let's start with that brief introduction to ORCID. What is ORCID? So ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. And ORCID is an identifier that is meant to uniquely identify you as an individual so that you can get credit and attribution for your work. It can also streamline your digital identity so that you can save time on administrative tasks like filling out forms. And it can help you track all of your affiliations and contributions in one place online. So ORCID is a nonprofit community-driven organization that serves the global research community. So one of the main components of ORCID is that ORCID ID. So the ORCID ID is a unique persistent identifier that is free of charge for researchers and individuals. And an ORCID ID is a 16-digit number. You can kind of see that here. It looks like a link, and that's because it is. So if you click on that link, you'll see Paolo's ORCID ID. If we click on his ORCID ID, we'll then take into his ORCID record. So Paolo's ORCID record here is populated with information similar to what you might see on a CV or a resume. The ORCID record includes information about the individual from their employment history, their education, any works or research outputs that they've done. We'll briefly mention what can be found in an ORCID record as I go along, and later in the presentation, we'll go into how you can populate it. So here is an example of an ORCID record. So you'll see here, this ORCID record compiles information in many different sections. There are areas for your email addresses, your websites, your social links, your countries, any name formation, so other ways you might be spelling or using your name, a section for your biography, and then keywords describing some of your research areas. Further down in the ORCID record, you start to see the activities, and that includes employment, which is obviously places you've worked, education, the places you've studied, and qualifications such as accomplishments you've earned. I'll note that these are affiliations, and further down we see the rest of those affiliations in professional activities, which includes membership, service, distinctions, invited positions, and then editorial service is a new one that ORCID added this year. So further in the ORCID record, you start to see the other sections. So that would be your funding, so any funding you've received. Research resources, which is any equipment you're using. The work section, which is those research outputs. So research articles, blogs, book chapters, anything like that will be in the work section. And then at the very end, there's a section for peer review activity. Then if we scroll back up to the start of the ORCID record, you'll see in this header area, there's a section that is called Show Record Summary. So if you click on this, you're then given this sort of summarized page of all the information in your ORCID record. So that will be statistics on how many works are in your record, highlighting key areas about you and your research. So it's just a nice, succinct way to showcase all the contents of your ORCID record. So that was a brief sort of introduction to the ORCID ID and the ORCID record. We'll now talk about some of the benefits of using and having an ORCID ID. So the ORCID ID can help distinguish you as a researcher or a contributor, making sure that your contributions are correctly attributed to you and not someone else who may share the same name as you. So that ORCID ID is unique to you and persists over time, even if your name or anything in your life changes. You kind of see this example here, all the names that are very similar. That ORCID ID can help ensure that everything is connected to you. And if your name changes or you use different versions of it in research outputs, people will be able to follow you throughout your career, even if you say, in this example, we have Paolo, he's used Paolo Guhilde or Paolo PP Guhilde, and so we'll know that those works are the same person. are authored by the same person, I should say. An ORCID ID can also help bolster your digital identity. So when you share your research with an employer for reporting purposes, for example, that organization can see what funding you've received or what works you've published all in one place very easily. It also helps you with meeting requirements from funders, publishers, and research organizations. There are many funders that are requiring or encouraging the use of ORCID when applying for grants or federal funding. Some of those include American Heart Association, Breast Cancer Research Foundation, Bright Focus Foundation, and as I mentioned, is also true for federal funders. So a couple of years ago, the Presidential Memorandum, the National Security Presidential Memo, or NSPM 33, stated that federal agencies shall establish policies regarding requirements for researchers applying for funding to provide a digital persistent identifier. So essentially what that means is when you apply for funding, you need to share a digital persistent identifier, and ORCID is such an identifier. As a result of this memo, federal funders like NIH and NSF have started to require that researchers use ORCID, such as when you're filling out your biosketches in Science CV. So you'll see here linked, and we'll also share in the chat, a document that the ORCID US community has created, sort of summarizing the US federal funder policies related to ORCID. And this is a living document, so we're updating it as these new policies come out. So you can take a look at this and work with your research administrators to stay informed on all these different policies and requirements. Publishers are also beginning to encourage or require ORCID when an individual is submitting a manuscript for publication. So some of those publishers include the Public Knowledge Project, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Springer Nature, Triple E, and the reason IEEE, sorry. And the reason for this is that publishers want to include ORCID IDs in the DOI metadata. And this is important for making sure that you as a researcher are getting credit for your work. And some publishers, like in this example, can potentially push your publications or your peer review activity to your ORCID record for you. Now, research organizations are also starting to encourage the use of ORCID, and those organizations are like universities, so Stanford, Florida State, Boston University, Washington University in St. Louis. And they're asking their researchers, students, their faculty to have an ORCID ID. And a lot of this has to do with how they're tracking or reporting research. And like publishers, they're starting to push works, your employment and education affiliations to ORCID records for you. And now, what this all really comes down to is that saving time piece. So, you as a researcher or contributor, using the ORCID record helps you with saving time when you're filling out applications and forms so you can very more quickly get the funding or the recognition that you need. So the ORCID record has information about your career, your employment, your education, works, funding, and you can more easily share that information with those different stakeholders, so publishers, organizations, funders, etc. So you are this, as a researcher or a contributor, you are at the center of this ecosystem. You connect to each aspect of this life cycle. So funding agencies can push funding awards to your ORCID record. Publishers will push works or publications. Universities can push education or employment, and it's all designed to support your research and your career and allow you to more easily navigate this entire process. So now that big question, how can you get an ORCID ID? This process is very quick and easy. It takes less than 60 seconds to register for an ORCID ID, and we'll post a link in the chat for you for anyone who would like to register. So now that I've walked you through what ORCID is, what is in an ORCID record, and the benefits of ORCID, I will now pass things on to Paolo to talk about how you can populate your ORCID record. So I will stop sharing. There you are, Paolo.
Thank you, Kayla, and welcome everyone again to our workshop today. So let me just go ahead and switch our slides and go to our section on how to populate and maintain your ORCID record. There we go, and hopefully you all can see that.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Kayla. All right, so again, so this section we're going to talk about how to populate your ORCID record. So now that you have an ORCID record and ORCID ID, so if you don't have one, please register to get one, and it's free. So Now we'll walk through some of the sections of the ORCID record and just basically take a look at and how you can populate them. So again, these are some of the sections of your ORCID records. You have the biographical information, the affiliations, and this include your employment, education. You also have a funding section, the work section, as well as a peer review and research resources. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the different ways that you could add information to your ORCID record. So you can always do a manual entry, but you could also do a search and link wizard, or you could do an auto update from, say, an organization that you have connected your ORCID ID with. So we'll walk through some of these sections as well, so that way you can kind of see how all of this ways to add information to your ORCID record works. All right, so the first thing we want to do is take a look at a manual entry. So in the affiliation section of your ORCID record, some of the things that you can do here is to basically add where you currently work, for example, or where you received your education. So those are some affiliation sections in the ORCID record, and you can add those information manually. An example here is adding employment for an employment information. So if you go to your employment section, you can go click on add, and then in here there will be a pop-up, and this pop-up you'll be able to add or start typing in the organization that you work at or you worked at previously. So for example, I worked previously at Northwestern University, and I can start typing in Northwestern. So once you start typing in the organization's name, there will start to be a suggested organization name that's available here. So as you find the organization that you worked at, you can go ahead and click on that. One of the things that we really emphasize is that we highly recommend that you pick the options that are presented to you in the drop-down menu. So that way, all of this information, the metadata behind the organization will be added to your ORCID record. So for example, here I'll pick Northwestern University, and then I will go ahead and choose that. Once that's chosen, all the metadata that's available there after you save all the changes will be added to your ORCID record. Now, I should actually add here, when you pick your organization that you worked at or previous or employment, we recommend also that you add additional details. So that would be like, say, you want to add a department name, for example, your role or your title, and of course, the dates that you worked at that organization. So those kind of details are really helpful when it comes to your ORCID record. So here, when that's added and saved to your ORCID record, it will then appear as such here. For example, this Northwestern University, you will have information about, I just added the years that I worked at there, as well as the title. So that's available there. So one thing to note here, when you are adding information to your ORCID record, so like you're adding it manually, for example, one of the things that I want to also kind of emphasize here is the source of the data. So at the bottom of that entry, you will see the source, which is my name. So all manual entries will have you as the source of the data. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And we'll kind of take a look at how sources affects throughout this presentation. So you'll see the different sources here and how that differs from one another. So this is a manual entry adding employment information, for example. In other affiliation sections of your ORCID record, you can do the same thing. You can add them manually as well. So that includes your education, qualifications, invited positions, distinctions, memberships, service, and editorial service. So those are the types of affiliations that are available that you can add in your ORCID record. And you can all do them manually if you like. All right, so now let's switch to a different section in your ORCID record. So the funding section of the ORCID record is available there for you as well. And this is really geared towards anyone that has received funding, whether from federal agencies or private funders. Again, in the funding section of ORCID, you can also add funding information manually. So there will be a pop-up again with all the details that you need to fill out and add information about your funding. The other way to add funding to your ORCID record, and probably the easiest one, is using a search and link wizard. A search and link wizard tool in ORCID basically allows you to import funding from a database within ORCID to your ORCID record. So this is an example here. So to do this, you would go click on add and then click on search and link. In the funding section, there's only one option for a search and link wizard, and that's Dimensions Wizard. Dimensions Wizard basically aggregate funding information from different funding agencies, and that also includes like federal funders as well. Now, it might not include everything, but there is something that you could that agencies that's available here or other private funders that's available here as well. So you have Dimensions Wizard, so you would click on Dimensions Wizard on here on step two. When you click on it, and especially if this is the first time that you click on the Dimensions Wizard, you will then presented with an authorization page. So there will be a pop-up that will have that ORCID ID logo, and then there will be an authorization page. So this is essentially an authorization where you would give Dimensions Wizard an authorization to basically take a look at your ORCID record and also update your ORCID record. So this is needed when it comes to, say, adding information from Dimensions Wizard to your ORCID record. So you would give the authorization access here. So you would then authorize Dimensions Wizard to make changes to your ORCID record. So once you give the authorization, you will then be brought to the Dimensions Wizard platform, and that's connected to ORCID. In here, you can search for your name. You could also search by a grant title, for example. So you could even search for like library if that's kind of the field that um, you are kind of related in or that you have received grants from. So you can search by grant title as well, or search by your name. So in this case, so let's say I search for a library and there's a funding that I have received from, years and years ago. So basically here, you would look for the funding that you have received based on, say, on the search criteria that you were looking for. So like, depending if you received it from NIH, search for the title or search for your name, for example. And then you would then click on the particular grant or funding information that you have received. So basically, the thing about this is that you are claiming the funding information or the funding yet you have received previously to be added to your ORCID record. So for example, here I click on the first one that resulted in libraries here. Once that's clicked, you will then go scroll down all the way to the bottom and hit next. And then you will be presented with that on seventh frame, for example, where it will tell you this is the grant that you have selected. Go ahead and review that. And then if you're satisfied and that's exactly the grant that you received, you will then go ahead and submit that to ORCID. Once you hit submit, you will then presented with a congratulations, for example, that it's been added to your ORCID record. And here, the last step, you will go back to your ORCID record, and that's what it would look like. This is what the information that's available, that's grabbed from the Dimensions Wizard database and added to your ORCID record. So the information about the grant, what the grant title is, the grant the basically the funder, for example, so an information about the funder, if there's a grant ID number that will be available there as well. So that's the funding section of the ORCID record. And again, you could also add funding using a manual entry as well in your ORCID record. All right, so now that we've kind of looked at the funding information, let's take a look at how to add works, or if you're much more familiar, like publications. But works is more of like an income, like a larger kind of product, right? So it includes all the products that you have produced as a scholar or as an academic, and any, as a student, for example, you can add that information to your ORCID record. And there are different work types that are available in ORCID today. It's not just journal articles, for example, or book chapters, but you could also add image information, for example, or musical composition. So all of those things can be added to your ORCID record. So the citations of these products that you have done as an academic or as a scholar can be added to your ORCID record. All right. So I want to provide an example also that you can do this as a manual entry. So the first thing would be say adding works as a manual entry. If you look at that drop-down menu, there are different ways that you could add works to your ORCID record. So you could use a DOI, for example, or your PubMed ID. So you can do that as well. The other section, we will take a look at that down below as well. But let's take a look at a work manual entry, for example. So again, let's go ahead and click on add and then click on add work manually. In here, you will have a pop-up again. So the information that you need to enter, so basically the citation information of your works. So the work type, for example. So we talked a little bit about the work types earlier, but you can pick and choose the work types that you want to add to your ORCID record. So here, click on that drop-down menu. I went ahead and selected blog post. But if you want to add, like, say, a creative item, so let's say an image or a musical composition or a video, all of those can be added to the ORCID record as well. So the information of that can be added to the ORCID record. So here, let's go ahead and click on blog post, and then I will go ahead and add the information, the citation information, basically the metadata in this particular work. So get the work title, the publisher, the dates, all of those things, and the URL, the link, right? So this one is a blog post available online. So I added a link to that particular blog post. So you'll see that again, once it's all added and you save the changes, it will then appear in your ORCID record. And that's how it would look like in your ORCID record right now. Again, with the source as you, since you added it manually. All right. So other ways that you could add works to your ORCID record is using a third-party system, for example. Now, this is similar to that Dimensions wizard kind of adding funding information to your ORCID record. So in here, I would say import works from other services. I would click on add and then click on import works from other services. So this is a way for you to kind of claim publications or works that are already been published. So makes it easier to really kind of grab those information, especially if you're just building your ORCID record. So here, for example, the same kind of idea as a search and link wizard is that there's a database that's connected in ORCID that you'll be able to go search for the item that you're looking for the publication that you're looking for, and have that added to your ORCID record. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. An example here would be connecting your ORCID ID with Crossref metadata search. A lot of publishers actually uses Crossref metadata, Crossref. So a lot of those publications go through that process. So again, when you click on a Crossref metadata search or any of those platforms that you could import your works from, like say the Lens or Web of Science, if this is the first time that you connected to it, you will be presented with an authorization page. So again, it's the same kind of idea that basically that you are giving this particular platform, this system, to make updates to your ORCID record. Things to really keep in mind is that you, as a researcher or as an ORCID user, you have full control of your ORCID record, and that you have to give permission for organizations and systems to make update to your ORCID record. So here I will go ahead and authorize Crossref metadata search to make updates to my ORCID record, and then you will be presented to the platform itself, the Crossref metadata search platform. In here, you can search for your name, your ORCID ID, the title, the DOI, all of those things you can search to kind of pull the metadata of your publications, for example. So in this particular example, I'm looking for just using a search basically with my name. And then I look through what came, the results. And then one of the results is one of the article that I wrote, for example. And then I would then go ahead and add that to my ORCID record. Now, this is really claiming your previous publications. If that particular publication, especially if you've been to your if you have used Crossref metadata search before, and then if you have not added that particular publication, it will say add to ORCID. So if you are brand new, for example, here in Crossref, you will then see that particular icon that says add to ORCID. So for your particular publication. So when you do go here, you would click on that, and then they will ask you again to make sure to confirm that you want to add that metadata or that particular publication citation to your ORCID record. And then you will say yes, and that will change to say it's going to be in your record. So that means it's already been pushed to your ORCID record. And then once that's done, it will then appear like this in your ORCID record. Now, again, the citation information, the metadata is available here. But take a look at the source. So we looked at a manual entry source, which is your name. Now, if you're using Search and Link Wizard, for example, or import works from other services, it will then say your name via, say, Crossref metadata search. So if for funding, it would say via Dimensions Wizard. So those are the different kind of systems that you've connected to within the ORCID record, within ORCID. So that's how the source would differ from a manual entry in this case. All right, so let's take a look at time. All right, so we have plenty of time. So that's another way to kind of add information or grab publication to your ORCID record and from you to add publications to your ORCID record. Now, if you are brand new to ORCID as well, and you have quite a lot of publications already, you're a seasoned researcher, you've already published quite a lot, and you're just starting your kind of ORCID journey here, and you're populating it. One thing that you could also do is to actually upload all of your publication citations at once to ORCID, and that would use a BibTeX file. So, for example, if you have a Google Scholar profile and you have a bunch of citations there, you can actually change that into a BibTeX file, the citation itself, and then upload that to your ORCID record. So here you would go ahead and then add BibTeX, for example, and then you would just follow the instructions that it's asking you to do within ORCID. So you would then go ahead and choose BibTeX files to import. So you would go ahead and look for that particular BibTeX file that you want to include, that you want that have the citations that you have, and add that to your ORCID record. So this is a way for you to kind of add a bulk. Basically, think of it as a bulk upload of all of your citations. So that way you don't have to be searching for one publications, for example, or you don't have to be using different kind of systems to add or to import publications to your ORCID record. All right, so we've looked at adding works using a manual entry. We can add works using import from other services. We've also looked at a BibTeX file. Another way that you could add works to your ORCID record is actually at the very early stage of your publications. So Crossref again, so we're talking a lot about Crossref right now, but there are two ways that Crossref handles the publications. Previous publications can be added through what we looked at earlier, doing like a Crossref metadata search. Now, if you have gonna be like publishing now, future publications, you can make this, you can add this information automatically to your ORCID record. So this can be done an auto update. So basically think of like future publications. So let's say you're gonna have a publication 2 years from now, and then that can be added directly to your ORCID record automatically. So this is an auto update via Crossref. This is their process. When you are submitting your manuscript, for the most part, publishers will ask for your ORCID ID. So they either want you to connect your ORCID ID with their system, which is ideal, and that's really the preferred, is that you are connecting your ORCID ID with the publishing the manuscript submission system, for example. Or they will also ask you to, via email perhaps. Not the most ideal, that's not the best practice, but it's better than nothing, right? So they will ask you for your ORCID ID via email, for example. A lot of this is because they want to add your ORCID ID in the metadata, so in the DOI metadata. So basically, your name that will be attached to your ORCID ID. Once that happens, since it's added to the metadata, it will go down the process that Crossref does. So the DOI that the publisher asks that minted will be minted through Crossref, for example, and then Crossref will then go ahead and move that along the process. Since the DOI is already attached to the ORCID ID is already attached to the DOI metadata, that will then get passed down to ORCID. And once that's passed down to ORCID, you will then receive an email that say Crossref would want to make changes to your ORCID record. So if this is the first time that you did this, you will then give Crossref the authorization, basically to make changes to your ORCID record. Again, authorization only really happens once. So once you give that authorization, any future kind of publications will then get automatically added to your ORCID record. And you will just get a notification that Crossref had made changes to your ORCID record, for example. So this is an auto update process, and it's really good, especially if you're still like starting out your career, for example, and you're just building your CV, you're building your research, your publishing, that sort of thing. So any future publications will just get added to your ORCID record automatically. So that kind of makes that easier for you and it saves you time down the road. All right, so that's kind of adding that, and this is actually kind of that process. You will get that notification. Again, if you have not given them the authorization before, you will give them that authorization once, and then once it's added to once you give that permission or authorization, that will then appear in your ORCID record. So you'll see here on the top here that says the source is Crossref. So auto updates or like basically if the source of the data is automatically done by the system itself, the source will switch to, in this case, Crossref, because they're the ones that added that information to your ORCID record. And you will also see that check mark there. And I will talk a bit more about what that check mark means in a few slides. But basically, that's what's going to happen is that the source of the data is no longer you because you're not adding it manually. It's no longer that says that via Dimensions Wizard, for example, because you're not doing the action of like claiming the particular works or claiming a funding to your ORCID record. But this time around, it's done by the system automatically and automatically adding to your ORCID record. So now the source becomes that system or the organization that did it. All right. And that's the same concept as a trusted organization. And that's really what a trusted organization is that when you give authorization to a particular system, for example, or to a particular kind of organization. So in this case, you would say, I give authorization to Crossref. I would give them that authorization. So authorize access here. And then these organizations, like for example, a university, I gave a university the authorization to make changes to my ORCID record. If that university, for example, has a system that's writing affiliations, so they write employment, they will then do that and they become the source of that data in the ORCID record. And the funder, the same thing. If I gave authorization to American Heart Association and their system is pushing that I received this funding from American Heart, they will become the source of the data. And that's the same thing with publisher as well, pushing, say, a data set citation to ORCID. And in this case, you will see that Vivly is the source of the data. So these are how trusted organizations work. So essentially, you are giving permission to the organization or to the system that they have that's connecting your ORCID ID. And they are a trusted organization in your ORCID record in this case. And all of that also is that in your ORCID record, if you go to your account settings, for example, or like where your name is at the top right section, you will see like different settings there, and then you'll see like a trusted party. So you can go here to the trusted parties section, and it will tell you these are the different organizations or systems that I have given permissions to. Again, as a researcher or as an ORCID user, for example, you have full control of your ORCID record. So you can actually also revoke access at any time. So let's say, for example, I work at one university and eventually I move to a different university and no longer work there. And you know what? I'd be like, I don't want to give access anymore to my previous university. So I could go ahead and revoke access to that if I wanted to. So anything that was added previously is available in your ORCID record, but that previous university can no longer add information in the future to your ORCID record. So there's no more kind of future interaction in that sense, unless you give them the permission again. All right, so that was quite a lot of information. So now let's take a look at some additional tips to kind of help you make all of this a little bit easier to populate as well as maintain your ORCID record. And just a few reminders essentially here. All right, so first things first is that we encourage you to use your ORCID ID wherever possible. The indicator here is that if you see that ORCID ID kind of ID icon, that green one, right? See it in the middle, that typically signals that that particular system that you're working with has an ORCID integration of some sort. Whether it could be like they are just grabbing data from your ORCID record, or they're writing data to your ORCID, so like employment, publications, that sort of thing. We want you to connect your ORCID ID. So that way you could save time down the road. Especially, let's say if you're applying for grants, for example, like you could connect your ORCID ID with Science CV, for example, and then you can create bio sketches based on the data that you have from your ORCID record, because it grabs the data from your ORCID record to Science CV, and then you can create bio sketches out of that. So we always encourage you to use your ORCID ID wherever possible. Now, the other thing I want to highlight is trust markers. So throughout this presentation, you probably have seen that green check marks, the source of the data. So that's what we're calling a trust marker. A trust marker is really adding additional credibility and validity to your ORCID record. Now, this doesn't mean that a manual entry is wrong. It's just that this particular check mark is just adding a little bit more to your ORCID record. So if you're authorizing, say, American Heart Association, a good example here again, they become the source of the data. They will have that check mark when they push that funding information to your ORCID record. Or let's say, for example, here I've made Lyrasis as a trusted organization, and they have Lyrasis is pushing employment to my ORCID record. They become the source, and they are a trust marker in my ORCID record. So this is just adding a little bit more of validity to your ORCID record in this sense. The other thing is the visibility settings of ORCID. So I have mentioned that you have full control of your ORCID record. As an ORCID user, as a researcher, as the owner of the ORCID ID, the ORCID record, you have full control of your ORCID record. In this sense, you can control the visibility settings of your ORCID record. So if you go to like the top right section, go to account settings, you can set your ORCID record, all of it, into like say a publicly, so that's everyone. You could change it to trusted organizations only. So again, trusted organizations are the systems and organizations that you have given permissions to, that you have given authorization to. Or you could change it to only me, which is basically private, and it's only just you that can change it. So that you can do that for the entire ORCID record. But you could also do this for the different data entry in the ORCID record itself. So, for example, down here on each entry in the employment section, that first employment that you have that you see here, and that's one of my employment information, I can change the visibility settings of that. So I don't want everyone to see, for example, that I work here, but I want, say, trusted organizations that are grabbing data from my ORCID ID or from my ORCID record to see it. So then they'll be able to grab that data and have that available for their own kind of the work that they needed to do. So you can do that for every sections of your or every entry in your ORCID record. So again, as a researcher, you have full control of your ORCID record, and that includes the visibility settings, and that includes like say that you can revoke access at any time or provide access to an organization or a system. The other thing also is these are actually fairly new. I believe this just, I would say within the last year. You can highlight particular things in your ORCID record. So you can highlight featured works, for example. So you can select, I believe, up to 5 works in your ORCID record. So you can highlight those works. And you will see that as highlighted like this, kind of like a yellowish kind of golden color. You could also highlight a particular employment information as well. So highlight or say a featured affiliation. So there's like that star there as well that you can that you can select or that you can click on. All right, so I think this is the tail end of our presentation now, but we do have additional information for you all. Again, we will share the recording links as well as the slide deck and other resources with you. So in this slide deck, you will have additional resources that's available here that you can take a look at, links to resources that you can use, that sort of thing. Actually, if you go down here, there's additional how-tos in this slide deck as well that will be helpful for you. All right. I guess we'll go ahead and open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions. And you can ask via chat or you could also unmute at this time if you like.
We did get one question just now. Do you recommend fully completing your ORCID, so that would be publications, employment, education, etc., before creating a biosketch in ScienceCV?
Yeah, if you're gonna use your um if you're gonna use ORCID, for example, to grab data and add that to your to the BioSketch, we definitely recommend that you add as much information as possible that you can. Of course, in bio sketches, right, you can only select 5 publications, for example, or products that you can add. So if you want to start, you can add with those 5 products first, for example, but you can certainly just add as many as you want. So it is easier down the road once it's added to your ORCID record to kind of create your bio sketches. But of course, by Science CV, you can add citations there as well. Even without the ORCID citations that you grabbed. But yeah, you can certainly start in ORCID and add as much information as you can. Yes, so we will share all the slide deck with you, and you will have you should be able to click on any of those links as well within the slides. And the additional links that we shared via chat, we will add that to the resources as well that we will share with you. All right.
We did get
Let's
one
take a look.
question.
Go ahead, Kim.
I've done much grant writing in public libraries before an academic. Can I just add those manually?
Yeah, I mean, if you can certainly add anything in ORCID manually, if you like. The only section that you can't really do anything in ORCID manually is the peer review section and the research resources section. Those section needs to be added by the organization themselves. But other than that, you can add information manually in ORCID, so you can certainly do that. Um, Tracy, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to find out more about. in this case. You're welcome. Great. Um, you can, you mean grants to apply or grants that you have received? Okay, so you can search for grants basically on Dimensions Wizard. So if you go to the funding section of ORCID and then go and search and link, and then on that area, it will take you to, let me see if I grab that section again, so you all can take a look at it. Let me go back, make sure I got it shared with you. Okay, so let me share again. Okay, okay, hold on a minute. Okay, let's go back here. All right, so hopefully you'll see that screen again. So in the funding section, you can certainly add or search for the grants. Uh, it's not complete, but if you click on Search and Link Wizard, go to Dimensions Wizard, and then it will take you to this platform for Dimensions Wizard, and you can search for previous grants that you potentially have received, that you have received, and then just search for the grant title or your name, and you should be able to find it. Now, this is not 100% complete, so it's not everything is represented here, but it may be available here. If it's not available here, you can always add the grant manually. Yes, a Dimensions Wizard is free. So basically, what it is that you just need to connect your ORCID ID within ORCID to do so. So in this case, you know, so when you click on Dimensions Wizard, for example, um, you will then authorize Dimensions Wizard to make changes to your ORCID record. So yeah, so that's available in ORCID itself when you start adding for funding information. And then you can just connect them. I hope that answers your question. All right, and then we have another question. Are there analytics for your ORCID in terms of seeing how many people viewed your record? Good question, Amanda. Unfortunately, there are no metrics associated with that in ORCID. So there's no way for, like, say, a researcher or you as or for an ORCID user, for example, to find out like how many people have looked at their ORCID record, or where are the people that are looked at their ORCID record. So it doesn't work, unfortunately, it does not work as say like what you would see like in LinkedIn, for example. But yeah, there are no analytics that are available within ORCID for researchers. Um, One of the things that I always also recommend, I don't think I've actually mentioned it earlier, but for just for visibility, like you as a researcher, one of the things that I always do is I always add my ORCID ID in like in my email signature, for example. So I have that added there. I add it to actually to my LinkedIn profile. I add a link to my ORCID record. So your ORCID ID is added there as well. So that way, anyone looking my my LinkedIn profile can go to my ORCID record if they wanted to. But certainly, or one of the things too is like, say, if I'm presenting at conferences or like, and they and then you add your blurb, for example, I always add at the end, say, for more information or like for more about me, you can go to my ORCID record with my ORCID ID linked there as well. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us. If you do have any additional questions, if you have questions after this session, feel free to email us at orchidus@lyrasis.org. That's what we're here for. We basically answer questions, help all of our members with anything related to ORCID. Oh, and I'm going to do a plug. If you are attending ALA at the end of the month, I'm going to be there. And if you want to chat about ORCID, please email us at orcidus@lyrasis.org. I'll be happy to have some time with you and chat about ORCID. All right. Okay. Other than that, watch out for our emails with the recording link, as well as the resources that we shared with you all today. So you should receive an email from us. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us.